God, it is our heart's prayer, just like in the days of Shlomo when he prayed and your presence came into that house and you filled that place, Lord. Abba, we want your Ruach to come in this place. Fill this house. Fill our hearts, Yeshua. Fill us. Fill us to overflowing. You promised that if we asked for your Ruach, you would pour him out onto us. Pour your Ruach out onto us today. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord God Almighty. Abba, as we turn our hearts to your word this morning, Abba, I pray that which is from you would find good soil, take root, and blossom for your kingdom and your glory. Lord, everything else, just let it fall to the wayside and become nothing, Lord. Let the spirit and atmosphere of worship that's in this place continue as we look into your word. B'Shem Yeshua, amen and amen. You may be seated. Hallelujah. Just before we get started, and I know this gentleman probably would never, he would just never in the world want me to do this, but I'm going to do it because I love him and we really respect him here at Beth Messiah. This last Sunday, if you were not able to attend, I wish you could have come out. Gary Zimmerman, who's in the back, if he wouldn't mind standing up. Gary Zimmerman brought his collection of scrolls. He has no idea how much he blessed this house and how much he blessed this one Jew and every other Jew and non-Jewish person who was here. We had every single scroll for the entire Tanakh, starting over here and going all the way over to the other side of the Bima. It was amazing, and Gary shared so much of his heart, his life, and his ministry. We're just glad to know Gary. And as a matter of fact, if you've seen that rare Torah scroll fragment that's out there in the street, that was donated to our synagogue by Gary Zimmerman and his organization. So we are just incredibly grateful for him, and we're glad to have him here with us this morning. I know he would hate me for doing this, but we love you, Gary. Thank you for blessing our synagogue. We really love you. Love your heart for our people. You got to understand, God has given access for this gentleman to go places that I would dream of, meeting with Sopharim and scribes in London and Jerusalem, meeting with the heads of seminaries and Christian organizations, and being able to say to them, why don't you have a copy of a Torah scroll here? Why don't you have this here? The Jews did this and kept this together. You should have this in this place. And God has just given him access, which is amazing. I think all of us were just touched by his story. Again, thank you, Gary, for sharing your life. Everybody, why don't you grab your copy of the scriptures? I'd love for you to say it together with me and say it like you mean it. Ha-fok-ba, de-kolaba. Ha-fok-ba, Mashiach-ba. Turn it and turn it. Everything you need is in it. Turn it and turn it, for the Messiah is in it. Amen? Well, if you are new today or you visiting, joining us online, we are concluding and wrapping up our 4-part series entitled Beauty Is. And if you haven't been here for the last couple of weeks, I've tried to make accessible for those of you who want it, the PowerPoints that you see up on the screen. You can go to our website right now, cbmhouston.org, click on that button, and you can download those right onto your phone. But before you do that, because some of the people in the last service, I think what they did is in the next portion, they got the PowerPoint real quick and they cheated on a little pop quiz that I was going to give them. And that's not cool to cheat, because I wanted to see who was really checked in over the last couple of weeks as we've been going over this message series. So let's play a little game of fill in the blank. And you're like, oh my gosh, I wasn't coming for Shabbat school. Welcome to Shabbat school. So let's practice together. Let's see if you can fill in the blank. To behold God's beauty is to be emboldened by God's beauty. All right, 2 of you were here, all right, on week number 1. Appreciate that. Here we go. Number 2, second message, we said this: the Messiah exchanged his beauty for our sinfulness to give us the beauty of his righteousness. All right, we had a few more that were there on the second week. Now, last week, you have no excuse if you were here, and I see some of your faces. I know you were here. So the praise of the praiseworthy is its own reward. All right, you guys are tracking right along. Over the last 3 weeks, we've been building one message after another message with just kind of one heart's cry, that we would begin to see beauty differently, because we'd begin to see beauty as anchored in God himself and not the beauty that the public square is offering. And along the way, I've tried to say over and over again that this is a really kind of an important idea in the scriptures, because see, listen, if you want to know the truth, then you should listen to what Yeshua says. And if you're ever confused about what he says, look at what he does, because it's always good. Everything he does is always good. And if your heart is melted by what you have seen and what you have heard, then you just experienced the beautiful one. Now listen, over the last couple of weeks, I've said that a lot of different kinds of people actually struggle with this topic of beauty. And they struggle with it for very different reasons. On the one hand, we said that religious people really struggle with this whole concept of beauty. Because religious people basically want a God who is a smart God and will give them useful information whenever it's needed. Or they want a God who's basically good and does good stuff for them on command. That's basically what a deeply religious person wants. But they don't want a beautiful God. Because see, a beautiful God will turn your heart inside out and turn your life in every direction that you didn't expect. And the way we know this is because remember way back when you would have done anything to capture the heart of that woman or that guy you call your husband or your bride. See, when a beauty like God's beauty comes in our lives, we'll do almost anything for that beauty. Just like Zacchaeus last week, who was willing to give everything, almost everything away for the sake of that one person standing in front of him, Yeshua. You see, religious people don't want necessarily a beautiful God. And we've said there's other people who struggle with this topic. And those are people who have been hurt by the public square. Those who've been hurt by the so-called message of beauty that's out there, an oppressive message and one that excludes people. And they struggle with this topic for a reason altogether different. And then there's a whole nother category of people we really didn't even get to talk about. And those are people who've been hurt by religious people, and then people who've been hurt by the public square's view of beauty. And they're just crippled. And when they come to this whole topic, they're like, listen, can we just go back to talking about prayer or discipleship? Because this whole thing about beauty it's kind of uncomfortable and a little bit subjective. But here's the thing. It's too important a topic to just pass by. We've got to get a hold of the vision in our heart for God's beauty. And today's message, I'm kind of hoping will just round out this entire series with this one idea. What captures the attention of your mind matters. And it matters a lot more than you actually think. I want you to say that with me. What captures the attention of your mind matters, and it matters more than you think. Listen. Anybody who knows me knows that I love reading books. The joke around our house is that Abba collects books like squirrels collect nuts. I mean, I'm crazy when it comes to reading. And I just enjoy reading, and I enjoy reading across a whole lot of different spectrums. And I really do like reading about like neuroscience and mind studies and how the mind works. Because, philosophically, I kind of disagree with, there's one whole camp of people that think your thoughts are nothing more than a bunch of chemicals in your brain and synapses that are just firing off all different times. And that's a really good view if you're like a pharmacist, right? Because you can medicate that. But the Hebrew Bible actually has a different version of what the mind is. The Hebrew Bible talks about the mind like being your kidneys or being your heart. It's actually this immaterial part of the person that's always working even when you're asleep, and your mind will go with you even into the next life. And so the Hebrew Bible has this very different kind of version that your mind is part of this immaterial makeup that's called the soul, or called the spirit. And some of you are getting mad right now because you're like, you should know, Michael, there's a spirit, soul, and body. There's three. And I'm like, dude, I don't care, whatever, 2, 3, you go with your number, I'll go with mine. Listen, all I know is that in the Bible, the mind is something that's so powerful that when God's word gets into it, it actually shapes and forms everything else that's going on inside of you. But listen, outside of my kind of philosophical pursuits that I like to get into and spend probably way too much time in, the other reason this whole topic just really interests me is because some of you know, before I came to faith, I spent 10 years as a drug addict. And one of the drugs of my choice that I did a lot of is a drug called LSD. Now, if you don't know what LSD is, it's a drug that really gets up here in your crawl space and causes you to hallucinate. And it's very toxic. It's actually very, very dangerous. And I said in the last service, I'm glad Prime wasn't in here, because there was one night when I took so much LSD that if I would have been arrested, they would have locked me up in an insane asylum because just the amount of LSD that was in my system. And there was about an 8-hour window during that night. I actually have no idea what in the world was going on. I just have no idea. I was in this like kind of crazy hallucinogenic state. And when I came to faith, I didn't realize what a toll all of these drugs had taken on my mind. 10 years worth of pretty heavy use. And so when I came to faith, I mean, man, my mind, it was messed up. I had to reteach myself some basic English, reteach myself some basic math skills that I still struggle with a lot of these same areas. I had to reteach myself at one point just basically how to tie my shoes. And you're going, no, you didn't. Yes, I did. It was horrible. It was bad, the place that I came out of. And listen, if you would have asked me almost 18 years ago now, or told me that I was going to go to college and do some of the things that I did, I would have told you, there ain't no way in the world. I mean, I could barely even read a book. And when I came to faith, I mean, I thought to myself, I was just grateful that I knew the Messiah. I was just grateful I had a relationship with him. And the people that I was hanging around when I first came to faith, they were people that loved God, but they came from a very similar story like mine. They came out of these hard kind of backgrounds, and we just all sought the Lord together. I mean, we would get together and pray for hours and hours in tongues, and we didn't have an interpreter. We didn't even have water. I mean, it was wild. And we had a good time in the Lord. Some of you know what I'm talking about. And I mean, we really just kind of like sensed and felt our way through things. And I mean, we loved the Bible, but we deeply loved prayer. And listen, I don't know how in the world this gal over here even married me, because I don't even know how I formed like a cogent sentence to talk to her. And some reason she married me. And listen, during this time while I'm meeting with all these people, my friends, and we're praying and we're just kind of sensing, feeling our way through the Lord, kind of secretly at my house, I was doing something that I thought my friends would kind of frown upon. I started reading theology books. And they didn't talk a lot about theology books. That was kind of like a scary word. But do you know what theology means? Talk about God. That's all theology means. What we're doing right now is theology. We're talking about God. That's really kind of all that word means. And so kind of like secretly behind the doors, my first year of marriage, I'm reading these books and I'm not really telling a whole lot of people. And I think this is an amazing statement, especially for it to be made in the first year of marriage, because my wife said to me, Michael, listen, you got a really sharp mind. And she actually meant it. She wasn't, first year of marriage, you never know what they're going to say to one another, but she actually meant it. You got a sharp mind and you need to go to college and get an education. And we prayed about it, we sought the Lord on it, and we really kind of felt like, yeah, this was God's will for us to go. And once we began to tell our friends we were going to go off and go to Moody Bible Institute, oh my gosh, the people who come out and give you the warnings, oh, they came. And I heard all the bad jokes. Michael, you better be careful. You know you're not going to seminary, you're going to a cemetery. Oh, come on, people, really? And I mean, they were so like, they built up this like fear inside of me, and they would tell me things like, you're gonna go to Bible college, and those professors, they're just gonna rip your heart out of your chest, and they're gonna fill it and stuff it with books and knowledge, and you're gonna be all heady and no heart. And I mean, listen, when Lauren and I got to Moody, the first day of school, I was expecting like the Bible version of Dracula to come out and suck the spiritual out of me or something. Because, see, what they were really saying to me is that if I went to Bible college, I would find an undevotional theology. It'd be all book smarts, all academics, but it would have no heart. And when I got there, can I tell you, that actually wasn't the experience that I found. It just wasn't. The people that I met, they loved God. But they also had a way of looking at the world that was a bit different than my friends. They kind of looked at the world like this guy, John Stott, an amazing theologian and writer. John Stott said this, but the fact that man's mind is fallen is no excuse for a retreat from thought into emotion. For the emotional side of man is equally fallen. Touché. Very good point, Mr. Stott. Indeed, sin has a more potent effect on our feelings than on our thinking, because our opinions are more easily checked by revealed truth than our experiences. So when I got to Bible college, I found these guys that were saying, listen, you got to hear this out. It's not that we shouldn't care about our heart, but we should really care about our mind and really focus on sharpening our minds in the Word. And sometimes that message came across as having this real solid theology, and they would accuse other people, my old friends, of having an untheological devotion. So they would kind of point their fingers on the other side of the fence and say, well, those guys over there, they're just all heart, all sense, all feeling, and they're a little bit untheological in their devotion. And here was the thing. I thought to myself, both sides are kind of wrong on this issue, because there has to be something better than this. What I was looking for was a devotional theology, the kind of talk about God that not only stirred up my mind, but it stirred my heart to worship. And you know what? I did find that when I was at DTS. I was mentored under, I think, some of the best people in the world. I got to sit at the feet of Dr. Michael, and you guys don't know him. You probably don't even know him. To me, he's a big deal. He was the son of Shoah survivors. His mother was at Dachau, and she was one of the women that Dr. Goebbels did medical experiments on. She came to faith before she was found out. She was in hiding with a Lutheran nun. That Lutheran nun led her to faith and gave her a copy of the Brit Hadashah. That's the only thing she took into Dachau with her besides a little primer that was in German. She kept her faith while she was in that concentration camp, came out with only a Brit Hadashah and a German primer because she wanted the world to know two things. One, she found the Messiah, and two, the Germans did hate us that bad because it was in a little primer that was written in German. And she led her son, Michael, to faith when he was just a child in Brooklyn. And it was hard to be a Messianic Jew during that time. And Michael had a strong faith, and he grew up in the Lord. He planted, I think, 5 or 6 congregations up in the New York kind of eastern area. He oversaw Chosen People Ministries for a number of years. That's the guy that I got to sit at his feet. And he taught me that the Torah was still my book. And that I could go to the Torah, and that Torah would inspire me not only to obey God, but it would inspire me to see the Messiah, that on every single page, if I looked, the Messiah would be there. Whether it was in the Torah, whether it was in the Ketuvim or in the Nevim, the Messiah was there. And you know that whole thing we do in the beginning, Hafok ba de Kolaba, Hafok ba Mashiach. Michael was kind of the one that got that thing planted in me, that no matter how hard you looked, if you looked into the Torah, the Messiah would be there. And that made me want to worship. There was a devotional kind of theology. It meant a lot to me. And when I went to seminary, and I went to Dallas Theological Seminary, when I got to that school, listen, guys, I thought I knew everything. I mean, come on, listen. We all get arrogant, don't we? And I thought I had read every book, and I knew where to put all the dots on all of the yods and all the tittles. I thought I had everything under my belt. And I can remember sitting in my class with a man named Dr. Larry Waters. And at that time, I was holding to a certain kind of theological position that's called double predeterminism. Now, it's not necessarily Calvin's view. It was his later followers, but I was holding to that view. Most of you don't know what it is. You're thinking it's a massage. Okay, it's not. It's a view that says God elects some people to go to hell and he elects others to go to heaven. And you're going, ooh, I can't believe you believe that. Okay, there's lots of things you'd go, wow, I can't believe he believes that. That's just one. And I was sitting in this class with Dr. Waters, and we were chatting over this particular thing, and Dr. Waters said, so Michael, I was a career missionary to the Philippines for 30 years. He gave his life on the mission field, planted a dozen or so congregations that are still thriving there to this day. And he said to me, Michael, I only had one son. He had 2 daughters. He said, I buried my son on the mission field. Died of disease. They couldn't treat it there. Could have treated it if they were in the United States. They couldn't treat it there. He said, are you telling me that God elected that to happen? That cured my double predeterminism. And you know that Dr. Waters was one of my best friends? He sat on the board of my ministry. Do you know why I'm not pursuing a PhD right now in my life? Because Dr. Waters was such a good friend to me. He came up to me at the end of my time in seminary and said, Michael, you don't need any more education. You got enough knowledge in your brain. You don't need any more. He said, go out and do ministry. Share what you've got. Go out and love God and love people and put some meat on the bones of this. And to this day, Dr. Waters and his wife Mary are our best friends. See, they taught us that theology could be powerful and devotional. It didn't have to be void of those things. I had guys like Dr. Hannah. I've shared his story. He used to start out at least once a semester at DTS, and he would look at us and say, young men and young women, you are the finest minds in the United States. Hardest school to get into is DTS. Hardest one to get out of is DTS. And then he would look at us and say, let me introduce you to 8 of your fellow alumni. Best Bible study in the world can be found at Sam Houston State Penitentiary. 8 of your colleagues, all with a 3.8 GPA or higher, are sitting there. A few of them on death row for heinous crimes. So if you think your knowledge makes you a better believer, you're wrong. I remember I was moved deeply that a GPA didn't matter, but what mattered was a life devoted to the Lord. A devotional theology. And I read books by guys that I admired, guys like Dr. Joseph Wolf. He was a Jewish pioneer before there were such things as Jewish pioneers. In the late 1700s and 1800s, risked his life to rescue a friend out of the Ottoman Empire. I read a book by Dr. Rabinowitz. Do you know that there wouldn't even be a messianic movement today if there wasn't a Dr. Rabinowitz? I read books by great theologians, one who I love deeply, you may not like, but I love him. His name is Jonathan Edwards. He started the first great awakening in America. I used to sit with their books open in front of me, and you know what I discovered? You could be as theological as you could be devotional. You could have your heart steadfast, and that word could transform not just your mind, but it could transform your entire being, your heart, and your way of thinking. Because see, guys, at the end of the day, it's very true. Say it with me. What captures the attention of your mind matters, and it matters more than you think. You start studying any great movement of God historically, two things always happen. People get set on fire for the Lord in prayer, and they get set on fire for His Word. It always happens, and it happens together, not apart. And listen, this whole thing about things that capture our mind, it doesn't just happen in seminary or Bible college, because most of us in this room probably have never been there, and you're not planning on going there. Mazel tov. Not everybody needs to. But for most of you in this room who are parents, you can remember that day when you begged people to stop sending your children gifts that sang songs because they drove you nuts. And it had nothing to do necessarily with the sound, but the song would just get stuck in your head. My daughter, Hazel, got this little stick pony, you know, the ones that you can kind of ride around the house. And you would press its ear, and it would sing this song. I'm a pretty pony, clickety-clack, clickety-clack. I'll never get that song out of my head. It's horrible. I feel like if I go crazy at the end of my life, I'm going to be in a hospital singing, I'm a pretty pony, clickety-clack. I mean, it's wild. And randomly around our house, once in a while, every one of us will start singing this pretty pony song. Why? Because it captures the attention of your mind. Our mind just grabs things. I mean, most of you know the song. The stars at night are big and bright. Deep in the heart of Texas. I mean, come on, listen. We didn't have to try for that one or put the words up on the screen. Why? Because it captures our mind. And once it gets in our mind, it has a way of just sticking there and staying there. And it's not just music. Think about some of the television shows you'll never get out of your mind. Our millennials in the room won't get this reference. But some of you remember a show called Cheers. Everybody, Ted Danson and Norm just went right into your brain. And listen, that show was so popular and pivotal that for a few years, every book that's ever been written on like planting new congregations or writing mission statements always referenced the show Cheers. That's how influential it became in culture, not just in popular culture, but in the world of the academy and the world of congregational planters. And for some of us who are in here in our Xers, we're never going to forget that show called Friends. And right when I said Friends, you just heard that guitar riff. I mean, it's horrible. These things, they just get kind of caught in our mind because it captured it. And see, that's the key. That really is the key. God's given us this mind so that it would be saturated, not with all of these things that are coming to us from the public square, but so that our minds could think critically about these things coming at it and have a filtration system that could somehow rightly divide the Word of God and rightly divide all of these things that are coming at us. And listen, this is so common sense. You don't even have to be a believer to recognize this, do you? Most people get this at the most rudimentary kind of level. One of those guys is a man named Bernard Baruch. He's an outstanding Jewish statesman. He was an advisor to 3 different American presidents. And he said this: whatever failures I have known, whatever errors I've committed, whatever follies I've witnessed in private and public life have been a consequence of action without thought. That is a devotion without thinking, just acting on impulse. And then on the other hand, he said, during my 87 years, I've witnessed a whole succession of technological revolutions, but none of them has done away with the need for character in the individual or the ability to think. He's saying the same thing that I'm saying. You have to have both devotion, character to act, and you've got to have a mind that wants to work. Folks, God didn't design us to just be a bucket that the world just pours all of its stuff in. Our mind is supposed to be like a guardian at a gate that's keeping and pushing some of the stuff from the world out. And not only pushing out, but we should be on the offensive, pushing our way into things. I think we all appreciate that and admire it, and that's why we love movies like Heaven is for Real, even though we disagree on some points in the movie. But it gets us to a point where we recognize things that are amazing, or like the new movie that's coming out that's called Risen. We appreciate that these things can grab and set up a filtration system for us. So here's the question. The one thing I want us to think about closing out this series and kind of rounding out what we've talked about, one idea. What captures the attention of your mind? When you're all alone and you don't have a television on, you don't have a radio on, and you don't have your earplugs in your ear from your iPhone, and it's just quiet, what images are going through your mind? What songs are playing in the background? What are your deepest thoughts? Because you see, those are the things that have captured your imagination. And wouldn't you like those things to at least somewhat look like the beauty of Adonai, rather than the beauty of this world? I dare you this week. Listen, I didn't challenge the other service. I dare you this week. Go into your prayer closet. I hope you have one. Turn the lights off, and for 5 minutes, just get still before the Lord. And pay attention to what comes across your mind, because you might go, you know what, there's some things that's captured my mind I need to deal with, and I need to pull some strongholds down, and I need to get some word inside of my old noggin up here in this crawl space. So what I want us to do today is we're going to look at a passage, a very popular passage in the book of Philippians chapter 4. We're going to be in about verse 8 or 9, an incredibly popular passage, so popular, I think you can go to Bed Bath & Beyond and you can probably find it on a plaque somewhere. And it's unfortunate that it's become that popular because it's almost like a mantra. But I think when Shaul initially gave that passage, it was absolutely revolutionary. And I want to give you guys, listen, I'm going to set up this passage because we've got to catch the intensity. And I'm going to spend a little bit more time setting it up than I normally do. So everybody hang on with me, take a couple of notes, but just hang with me for a second because I really want to set this up for you guys so you can see the potency of what Shaul was saying. Now, we remember that Shaul visited Philippi, the city, in about 50 CE on a second missionary journey. And when he went to the city of Philippi, this was a patriotic city. As a matter of fact, this was the city where Mark Antony and Octavian defeated Brutus and Cassius, the assassins of Julius Caesar. And Octavian and Antony put a kind of a regiment of Roman veteran soldiers in Philippi. It was a loyal city. The whole design of the city is patterned after Rome. And it was such a designated kind of like patriotic city that if you were born there, you were granted automatic citizenship. Just like today, if you're born in Puerto Rico, you're granted U.S. citizenship. That's how important this city was to Rome. It was like a second capital closer towards the Middle East. And when Shaul got there, it was a melting pot of activity, religious, economically, and any other way. Remember when he gets there, he goes to find a synagogue, but there's no synagogue in Philippi. Instead, he finds a bunch of women that are down praying by a river, probably because that's where a mikveh was. And they were there on the Shabbat, probably holding like some kind of a prayer service outside. And Shaul preaches the gospel, and one of those women named Lydia, faith. Now, she wasn't Jewish. She's probably a proselyte, but she comes to faith. Shaul goes to her house, and then it says her whole family came to faith. I think that's a revival. Wouldn't we want that for all of our families? God, let all of our children, grandchildren come to faith, all of our extended families. And then after that, Shaul is walking in the Acropolis or in the market area, and there's a slave girl with the spirit of divination. And what does Shaul do? Drives that spirit of divination out of that girl, but it doesn't cause a revival. It actually causes a riot. And so they lock Shaul and Silas up in a prison. And do you guys remember what it says that in the middle of the night in Acts 16 that they were singing and praising, and there was like an earthquake, and the cells of the jail came open, and all the prisoners ran out except for Shaul and Silas. They stayed there worshiping their God. And do you remember what happened next? He leads a Roman jailer to faith. And it says that he and his whole household came to faith. It was a melting pot of activity. And Shaul was courageous in his presentation of the gospel. But 12 years had elapsed since he was first there, and things were really changing in the Roman Empire. They were hunting down believers, and Shaul was one of them, and throwing them into prison. And the world was changing all around them. As a matter of fact, not too long after Shaul writes this letter, tensions begin to build between Jerusalem and Rome that will culminate in the start of the Jewish wars in 66 and the official persecution of believers, which Shaul was targeted by Nero and beheaded by him in 68. The world was topsy-turvy. Honestly, folks, when you read the letter to the Philippians, it's not too much different than what's going on in the world today. It was unrest almost everywhere. And Shaul writes this letter from a Roman prison. He's not under house arrest, but he's in a prison like this. It would have been a makeshift cistern that was formerly used as a sewage container. And he starts off the letter and he says, because of my imprisonment, most of the brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord to dare more than ever to speak the message fearlessly. Do you know what I love about the letter to the Philippians? You see this side of Shaul that gets missed from our society today. A lot of times in our society, it's all about me, 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 me. Get me on a selfie, me on a trip. Shaul is in a sewage prison, y'all. And do you know what he's thinking about? What's going on out there. That's a testimony to his faith. But there's something else about this letter. It's one of the most intimate letters in all of the Brit Hadashah. Every time somebody wants to talk about what made Shaul tick, you always go to Philippians. That's where we learn that he's from the tribe of Benjamin. That's where we learn that he's a Hebrew of Hebrews, circumcised on the 8th day. He was a Pharisee, and he was righteous according to the law by his own testimony. The book of Philippians brings us right into the heart. It's intimate with Shaul. But here's the other thing that makes this letter special. It's the last letter that he's going to write to any congregation. It's the last one. The only letters left that he'll write are 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus to his 2 spiritual sons. This is his last official document of a leader at a congregational letter. And despite the fact that he's locked up like this, he calls this congregation his joy and crown. He speaks about them in such a loving, caring way. And even though his needs are immense in that prison, all he cares about are these people. He cares about this congregation. Because, see, the congregation was under attack from false teachers outside, and they were working through difficulties on the inside. There was striving between 2 different women, and Shaul was somehow just trying to heal that rift. And when we come to Philippians 4, 8, and 9, that's why I wanted to give you all this background. Shaul was giving us his closing statement. This is his final word. This is his coup de grace. This is like a lawyer giving his last statement and in his case. It's the last thing he wants them to pay attention to and listen to. And he says this, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any virtue, if there is anything worthy of praise, dwell on these things. This is the last piece of advice. Fill your mind with all of the right things and not all of the wrong things. And the way he writes it, he means to slow you down. Now, you guys really are freaking out. You're like, whoa, we just went back to English class and we're diagramming sentences. Anytime you do a good Bible study, you're supposed to always diagram sentences. But lists in the Bible are very important. And in this list, the way Shaul writes it, it's unique. It actually, when you read it in Greek, it makes you stop at each one of those words and pause. Because what Shaul is trying to say is each one of these things are incredibly important. Because if you will think on these things, and that word that he uses to dwell on is not the word to meditate, it's actually an accounting word that means to add up things. It's used in Romans 4, where it says that God reckoned the faith of Abraham to him as righteousness. See, what Shaul is saying, he's not talking about the act of meditation. He's talking about the act of filtrating out things from this world and taking the things that are good, the things that are honorable, just, pure, and lovely, commendable, and adding those things to your faith. Because, folks, have you ever noticed all around you that there's little pieces of beauty all around? Have you ever read the book of Proverbs? Go to the ant, thou sluggard, and be wise. Learn of her ways. There's 3 things that amaze me and 4 that make my mind go poof. The way of a ship on the sea. Have you ever noticed that all around you, when you look, you can find these things? Shaul is saying there's plenty out there that you can look to. And it's the true, it's the good, it's the beautiful. You can look around and you can find it. And he says, and if there's anything that has virtue, anything that's worthy of praise, those are things, if something is worth praise, do you know what that is? That's something that has captured the attention of your mind. He said that is worth dwelling on. Because see, it's not enough just to think on the right things. It's also important to love the right things. You see, if all you do is think about the right things, you'll have all the facts down. You also have to love the right things, because that's where the fire comes. Do you ever notice you can look around this world and there's things in one place that are lovely, things in another place that are good and moral. There's things that are in another place that are truthful. But do you know that there's only one place in all the world? There's only one human life where all three of these things can be found. And that's in the life of Yeshua. And they're found all together to the greatest possible degree. That's why every week I keep telling you, go back to Yeshua. He's the true, he's the good, he's the beautiful. And I don't mean just go back to the Brit Hadashah. Do you realize it's one story? That he's there in Bereshit, that he's there in Devarim, that he's in the book of Psalms and Isaiah. Do you realize? Turn it and turn it. Everything you need is in it. Turn it and turn it. The Messiah is in it. And when you look and you see him, he's there to the greatest possible degree. You want to know what's beautiful? Look for the Messiah. And here Shaul turns and he begins to say something that's powerful. It's that real beauty is not about a what. It's not about what you can wear. It's not about what car you drive, what neighborhood you live in. It's about a who. And that who is Yeshua himself. That's the point that Shaul was trying to make. And then he says, what you have learned and received and heard and seen in me. Shaul is talking like a rabbi now. You've witnessed my life. And guys, what are the things we've seen? Here was a trained rabbi who gave his life for his calling. Here was a guy that could have done anything, even persecute believers to the endest part of the world. But instead, he followed the Messiah to the furthest parts. He gave up almost everything. The reason most of us are in this room today is because of his work in his hands. But we know something else about him. He said, more than anything else, I consider everything to be a loss in comparison to the surpassing value of the knowledge of Messiah, Yeshua, my Lord. Some people have asked me, well, Michael, does that mean he's talking about revelatory knowledge? You know, like when you pray and you get kind of like revelation in your spirit? Maybe. Maybe that's exactly what he's talking about. I think he probably also is talking about how zealous he was to maybe just be around Kepha and be like, hey, Kepha, can you tell me about that time when y'all were out on the boat in Galilee again? Hey, Matthew, would you tell me that parable again that he told you? Because that was really amazing. See, I think it wasn't that he was just hungry for revelatory or illumination in his heart kind of knowledge. I think Shaul would have gone to Jerusalem as many times as he could afford to just hear the guys who were with him, the original eyewitnesses, tell him everything about Yeshua does. Because you see, that's what he's trying to say. Everything for him is about having this foundation, this filtration system that is the knowledge of the Messiah, Yeshua, his Lord. That's what had captured all of his mind. And he said his mind was so full of it. And he said, if you've seen those things in him, he says, put them into practice. And folks, here's what separates Shaul from a Greek philosopher. He's a rabbi. Greek philosophers say these are great ideas. Rabbis say, here's a great theological truth. Go do something about it. Don't just be a hearer, be a doer. And Shaul says, all of these things, you've seen how I live my life, how I followed the Messiah. You've seen these things. Now you go and do something about it. Because you see, that's what good theology always does. Theology never lives at the level of idea. It lives at the level of heart change and changed lives. And he says, and when it's changing your life, look at what happens. The God of Shalom will be with you. Maybe the reason you don't have peace in your life has very little to do with how much you pray or don't pray, fast or don't fast. Maybe it has everything to do with you don't have a great filtration system. And so all of these things that are bombarding you from the public square, maybe that's the reason that you don't have shalom in your life. But Shaul says if you'll just put a little attention to his word, God will put a lot of shalom your way. You see, it matters what captures your mind because your shalom depends on it. It depends on it. We need to be people who are lovers of God with all of our heart, mind, soul, and spirit. It's not just one of them, it's all of them. So I want us to close with just this final thought. One last thing in this message series. I want you to think about it and just ask yourself the question, do you have a beautiful mind? Do you care about having a beautiful theology? Beautiful talk about God. Are you willing to spend the time to dig in His Word and let His Word so enrich your life that it just flames your heart to a blaze so that you'll actually do something and have a beautiful devotion? Will you be the kind of person that when you go to God's Word every morning, you won't leave there until you go, I know there's at least one thing I must do today. I know there must one action I must do, one attitude I should change, one person I should reach out to. Would you be that kind of person who puts it into practice so you'll have a beautiful devotion just like Shaul did? Because when you do, here's the thing. The shalom of the beautiful one, it'll protect you. Lord, let our hearts be captured by that beauty, the beauty of your face. Let our minds be captured by your beauty. God, whether it's through prayer or through your words, God, capture us again, Lord, so that we would dwell on these things and put them into practice. And may the God of shalom be with all who are here today. B'Shem Yeshua. Amen.